All right, this is part two of the lecture for this week, and this part is really exciting just because this is a question that a lot of you asked is what are the components of special education? How do we do accommodations? What are some of the strategies that we use that I can put in my classroom? Well, today we're going to do the overview, and in a future week, we're going to talk more extensively about how to apply it to your classroom. But you have to have these foundational principles before we can get to the next deeper part. So as I said before, we are full of acronyms in education. We have MTSS and UDL, but we'll also talk about differentiated instruction and other components as well. So this chart that was in your textbook is the pivotal structure of what you need to know. So keep hold of this. These are the four cornerstones of effective inclusive education, and they're just really true. So MTSS is very similar to RTI. You might have heard of that. So that's really addressing students' needs before they get to the point where they're failing. You know, we want to catch it before it's too late, and that's what RTI does. We have effective systematic instruction. We need to be good teachers and have good strategies. This is why this class is amazing for people who could end up being a general ed teacher, because you can use this in every class you ever teach. Differentiated instruction is the same because no learners are the same, whether they have an IEP or whether they don't. And universal design for learning is also a very generalizable strategy that you can use for all students. So I think you'll really benefit and enjoy this. Collaboration and teaming is right above the pillars, because if we don't work well with our co-teachers, if we don't find time to common plan and make sure we know what we're doing every class, if we don't use our the principals and administrators and just supports within the community, then we're not being effective. And we have to be able to do those well. We have to become good teachers in practice, and that has to all lead to improved student performance. That's the goal of everything. So with this here, with RTI, this is the same as MTSS, and currently MTSS is the more common term that is used in the school systems. You'll hear both terms out there. So the goal of it is to provide high quality instruction, but with interventions that are matched to the student's need. The thing I love about this is that it's tailored, which education should be. You know, we oftentimes think it's like the industrial age where all of this started out, where we have rows and rows of students and you give one thing out and you expect them all to learn it the same way, and you expect them all to give you output in the same way. It's just not reasonable. It might have been the principles and theory of industrial era, but it is not true here. Think about yourself. Think about all the times you've been in a classroom. Does it help you if your teachers offer videos as a supplement? Do you like to do projects sometimes instead of always having to write a paper or take a quiz? Do you like choices when you're able to pick your assignments? Well, if you said yes to any of those, I guarantee your students will say yes to that too. So we want to make sure to vary things and make things interesting. And also it's used to, inform educational decisions. We have to collect data. And that's what the lesson, if you've already watched that YouTube lesson about single case design, group design, we have to learn how to monitor how students are doing. How's their academic learning going? How's the behavioral side? How's this curriculum? Is this effective or is it not? We always have to be gathering data. Otherwise, we're just doing stuff and hoping it works, which really isn't the best method in life. I loved this image and I thought y'all might enjoy it too. Hopefully we never become this teacher right here. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. So who's looking happy in this row and who's looking stressed like some students right before they take an exam? I actually had a student ask me in art class who wanted to know if students with disabilities, how they do on tests. And the research shows that a lot of students with disabilities don't test well. But I was on a research team for middle school math that tested students the traditional way. And then we tested other routes, like oral testing, where they tell you the answers. And you could do that. You can do projects, you can do presentations. Uh, there's so many ways to tell a teacher the content that you know. And the students that get really high test anxiety or don't do well in paper pencil tests, they might not do well, but these other projects are an alternate option so that you could say, I know they know a lot more than what they're showing me on this paper pencil test. Let me try another route so that I can get all the information possible from them. That's the goal. We don't want to trip people up and just fail them. Our goal is to actually reach mastery and gain all the information that they have in their head and try and figure out what they are good at. What are their strengths? How can they learn this material best? So we mentioned this before, RTI and MTSS are synonymous. And the goal of it all is to make sure that our students receive appropriate intensity of instruction and the right supports to be successful. We want to be this picture. We want to help all of our students individually up the cliff of learning. And we don't want to be the teachers just shoving them down, theoretically, not physically. I want you to understand that. We want to be the people who are reaching our hand out, whatever it takes to say, okay, our students learn a different way. So I'm going to do what it takes to implement different strategies within my lesson plans. So with RTI, we have two goals here. We want to prevent academic problems, and it also helps us determine students who have learning disabilities. So instead of saying, well, we're just going to see who fails this year and then we'll deal with it after that, we don't want to wait till the end of the year to figure this out. All throughout, we start looking at our grade books. We see, okay, which students are not doing well? Who do I need to reach out to and say, hey, what's going on with this assignment? What's happening here? You want to catch failure early and not wait till the end, because then they have no chance to fix it. And this is why it's really important for teachers to stay on top of grading and their grade book, because I've seen it. This has actually happened at the school I taught at, that some teachers did not input any grades until midterms. And then that's just because the administration forced them to. So by that point, you get parents who are already calling because they wanted to know what their students' grades are. And now they say, oh my gosh, my student has an F on his midterm. How are we ever going to make that up throughout the semester? Instead, be the teacher who, after 1 week, after 3 weeks, after a few weeks, you can look down your grade book and see those red highlights come up and say, ooh, I've got to reach out to the student and I got to help them learn a different way. We got to do whatever it takes. And they also have to put in the effort. So you can remind them, I'm doing everything I can to accommodate and do differentiation for you. I need you to work with me and give me your all. So if you explain that to them, a lot of times they will step up and work harder. We also want to use a problem-solving model. We don't ever want to take these grades and just bash students and say, I can't believe they're failing and I can't believe they don't know how to do basic things. That's another thing a lot of teachers say once they're burnt out and in the field too long. That's the point where you think you people should retire. But we have to look at it as, okay, I'm here to support and help a hand to reach and help them up the cliff. We just want to be supportive teachers. And the way we can do that after we problem solve is implement differentiated curriculum and different instructional methods, interventions that can help them. We talked about this a little bit before. RTI can be used for both academic and behavioral reasons. And this is, once again, we can also determine if students could potentially qualify for special education. If they get to the top of the RTI triangle and intervention is still not working for them, then it's time to start testing and seeing if special education is a needed option. So what does RTI implementation look like? Well, we want to have high quality research-based instruction, which is why the last lesson that I had posted was so heavy on research-based instruction. Because if this is what you're supposed to do with RTI and all the different intervention strategies, you have to know how to find it, because we're not finding it on Pinterest. We're not, it's even hard to find on teacher paid teachers and all those other sites that are out there. We have to learn how to look for research based. You can also go to Google Scholar. I didn't mention that before, but that's another option. It's not as good as your WKU library, but when you get out of the university setting and you need some options, try Google Scholar and see what you can find. We also want to make sure we're playing an active role in students' assessment. We need to be assessing often, continuous assessment. And that is one of the hardest parts for teachers that I've noticed, is maintaining that, because after a whole week and you've given all of your students assignments, you have to actually grade and make time to do that in such a busy schedule, and input the grades so that you can adjust your lessons according to how students are doing. It's key. But in the real world, teachers don't do it often. And that is incredibly sad, because that means they're not being an effective teacher. There could be screening. Staff can conduct screening from RTI for academics and behavior. And we have to think of interventions to help students when they face difficulties. Teachers are some of the most creative people, because instead of just getting frustrated and angry and thinking, why is the student not doing what I need them to do, we have to start brainstorming. It's like a detective. You have to decide, okay, what's really happening here, which you'll find some more tools in our behavior strategy lessons. And then you have to come up with some kind of intervention and take data to see if it's working. If it's working, great. If it's not, go back to the drawing board and find a new intervention. There are different levels of intervention within MTSS, and I'm just going to go straight to this because it's a lot easier to understand, in my opinion. So we have primary instruction. This is that first tier of MTSS or RTI, and about 80% of the students are within this. These are typical classroom-wide strategies that we use. We use them with everybody, and we put them in place so that we can prevent problems, whether they're behavior, strategies, or guidelines, rules, all kinds of things that you can put in place, token economies. It could be academic, where you put in place graphic organizers for the whole class, or you put a calendar, an hour by hour calendar on the classroom wall for elementary, higher elementary age students. Maybe if you need to put YouTube videos or have a reader, maybe you could assign all the students to read along with you so that you don't have to have a reader for just one student. These are generalizable tools, and that works for 80% of the students. Even after you do all of this and you've got these accommodations and strategies in place, there will still be a small group of students who are not doing well in your group. And for RTI and MTSS, that means they're in the secondary group. And this is more specialized. And I'll talk about that more in a second, but I just want you to see the picture. And this is the third level, and they're less than 5%, and they need intensive strategies and accommodations, and they most likely will be the ones tested for special education if they don't start doing well after implementation is finished. I did just want to note here, because we've talked a lot about this already, the roles and responsibilities for Tier 1 is primarily the general education teacher. Gen Ed teacher takes care of Tier 1 of the MTSS pyramid, and that's because you administer it to all students. So you need to know these strategies so that you can help students right off the bat, those 80%, and then try and prevent those 15% from getting to that point. But obviously at some points, we can't prevent it. The students who might have a learning gap that are in that 80% and moving up to the 15% could be students from low socioeconomic backgrounds. They could have cultural diversity. They could be English language learners in special education already. they might just be tired of school and disengaged. They might have a bad home life and they are not getting food at home, or they have abusive home lives and they really just don't care about school. And that's the thing that breaks your heart as a teacher, really. And sometimes it's a gender difference that could affect it. Some students who are more gifted and talented, a lot of times you'll see that students who are gifted and talented can look like students who have ADHD. They can sometimes get in trouble, but it's not because they're not able to do the work, it's because they're getting bored in class. So you've got that group who needs higher level of supports in extra work and extra engagement, and you have to identify them as well. And the role and responsibility of this would be the variety of personnel. So there could be an MTSS team at your school or a PBIS coach who will help you with this. You have to reach out to somebody and work together. So there are different types of interventions, and once again, it goes back to evidence-based practices. These are the ones that you're going to look up this week, and in future weeks, we're going to actually talk about specific strategies, but this is an overview of what's coming because if you get it all at once, sometimes it's just too much. So that's why the textbook breaks it down like that. And this whole summary is all about evidence-based practices. We want to give the best to our students. And then this third tier, this is the 5%. This is the most extreme situations of academic failure and behavior that you're going to see. There are different individuals who help with this as well. Once again, it could be whoever's in charge of RTI at your school or the PBIS coach that is in your area, and it could take some pull out. They might work with students individually. They might have people come in and do more intensive interventions, progress monitoring. So this is where that student is getting a lot of attention because they're noticing that if we don't reach out and really work hard with the student, they might not make it and they might not pass by the end of the year. The good thing about RTI is that we're not waiting for them to fail. We never want to do that. We can make sure that a student's poor academic performance is not due to a teacher's error or a curriculum that is not helpful. Because if only one or two students in the class are not doing well, that shows that, it's probably something we need to help the student with. If your whole class is failing and not doing well, 80 to 100% of the time, it's the teacher error. And the teacher needs to go back to the drawing board and figure out why are they not implementing this correctly and what can they do differently. This is huge. And it helps teachers collect more data and stay on top of things just because they have to for a school mandate to stay on top of RTI. Here's an example of something a teacher did, and I thought this was amazing. And once again, all of the principles I went over from the last lecture are right here on how you conduct RTI assessments and how you collect RTI data. So as you can see, here's the baseline. This is where all the students started out. And though this teacher did 1 point of data, they should have done 3. Remember, 3 is the golden number. So 3 days or 3 sessions should have happened. And then they've got all the students here listed in different colors. And you could see that generally these students are at the same point. So it means Kia is running low, and then whoever's in dark purple, Doug, is a little bit above the curve here. So you can see, oh my gosh, I really need to pay attention to and help this student. And then this one might need some extra supplemental work. So now that we've determined that Kia is our student who needs extra attention and we really need to focus on this student, we will individualize their data points and then take an average of the rest of the class and plot their points. As you can see, this student is running way below the average. Now we can put in a targeted intervention. Remember, our line is the intervention. So we put the intervention in place. Now the baseline data, they did do 3 to 4 points here, which is what they're supposed to do. And the NKEA's results are stable. Remember, we have to have a stable baseline before we can proceed to intervention. She's consistently low. The rest of the class is ascending, which is what they're supposed to do because we're not targeting them for intervention. This is just a comparison group. Theirs is going great. They're going up, up, up. Then they kind of plateau, which is for whatever reason. But after the intervention was put in place, Kia's scores start going up. What does that tell us? That tells us that the intervention worked and that this is going well. So we're going to keep going with it. And hopefully, after a few more sessions, she's going to get back up with the rest of the class. And you might think, how in the world am I supposed to do this with all of those students in one classroom? I'm telling you, it is so worth it because that one student's life matters. And it's interesting because if this student continually goes under the rug because the teacher just says, you know what, 90% of my students are doing great, too bad for Kia. The probability of her continually failing throughout the rest of her life because she didn't get those foundational principles in your class, she will be way behind the next year, and then the next year she'll be way behind, and then that's where it leads to dropout in high school. So you elementary teachers are crucial. If you make sure that your students are getting it and get them all the support that they can get, then they have a higher chance and likelihood of graduating and not dropping out when they're in high school. So what you do is so crucial for each student. This is just the trend line as we talked about in the last lecture. This trend line tells you their data should at least be looking like this. And so far it is. The students are increasing on average. Now we can see that her trend line is parallel to the rest of the class, which is what we want. This is a successful intervention. That means we did it. And see, it only took, once we did 4 days, you could think of it this way. It takes 4 days to figure out what's going wrong, and that's baseline. Then it takes maybe another 10 to 12 days to document the intervention. What a difference. If you take 2 weeks to help a really struggling student out of a whole year, those 2 weeks could change a child's life. And it could become our priority if we make it our priority to do this. And that's what it comes down to. We have so many tasks as teachers, but this should be our number one goal, is to take data like this. Let's say that in an alternate reality, you implemented a intervention. So you did baseline, it was stable, the class average is doing great. You implemented intervention and it stayed low. It didn't increase, it stayed the same. So this would tell you this is an unsuccessful intervention. So you're thinking, okay, how do I even implement effective instruction? So here are a couple ways that were listed in your textbook. And we're going to, like I said, talk about these deeper in later times. But first thing you can do, group your students correctly for instruction. You can do it by ability, you can do it by mixed ability, or you can do individual tutoring. This one takes the most time. But if you can get some peer tutors to come, or that they could get into after-school tutoring, if you have practicum or interns that come into your classrooms, that's a great use of those resources. As for ability and mixed ability, it really depends. I've found that it's usually best to have a mixed ability group. If you have really high learners and low learners in the same group, the high learners will end up in a way tutoring and helping the students who aren't doing as well. And sometimes students just respect each other enough where they're going to listen and learn from them, even if they aren't getting it from us. You can also present content in active projects and demonstrations. Do fun things. You know, if you're trained as an elementary teacher, you're going to have a lot of these tools in your tool bag. If you're trained as a middle and high school teacher, I'm telling you, a lot of them really love active project-based learning. Make it fun, relate it to real world experiences because they want interesting and fun just as much as elementary does. It's so funny because elementary schools, you see all this color and all these activities and games and all this. And then they get to middle school and high school and it just goes away. And I personally think that is to their detriment because they need that same differentiation and options and not just paper and pencil all the time. And then once again, you have to continually check for understanding when you present content. Are they getting it? Are they not getting it? You also can provide different opportunities for practice. I always say it's a great model to give the direct instruction, show them how to do it, model it, give them an example, let them practice under your watch. So you could be in the classroom with 5 example problems, see how they're doing, and give them independent practice. They could do problems by themselves in the classroom, or they could potentially go home with homework. That's what the homework is for. So when you do a comparison here between a traditional classroom and a differentiated classroom, this is what it looks like. In a traditional room, you're going to see at the end of the learning who got it. So either at the end of the day, or the end of the week, or the end of the unit, you're like, oh, they took the final test. That's great. These students failed. These students did great. And you don't want to get to that point. But that's what traditional classrooms do a lot of the times. They might have a single definition of what excellence is. There's only one way to do it right. There's only one way to turn the project in or the paper in. There's that's it. So students who might be stronger in other areas just don't do very well. I saw this all the time with my students who are more action and movement based. They were great at projects. They could have put a car together, a lot of my high school students, but they couldn't take a test in PE without failing it. So you're thinking, how does they can do real world things and pass, but they can't take this test? What's wrong? So if it's similar content or the same content, why not make it a project for them and score them that way? This is whole class instruction dominates. So you just teach to everybody at once. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. I'm sorry. And then there's one text that you get. There's not multiple options or reading choices, and a single form of assessment is used. So it could be one test, you have no choice. So if you remember last week when I gave you that assignment, the purpose of that, and it wasn't a very detailed differentiation, but it did have it. So you can recall I gave you student choice. I gave you a creative option to make something instead of just writing a paper for me. I explained to you what was going on. I modeled it for you. I broke it down into a graphic organizer. So in one project, instead of telling you, summarize this article for me, I listed out several different ways and you had different options to give me the feedback. But I believe all of you learned. I saw you all get so much great information out of it, and I was so impressed with the outcomes. So I got my same results, but I think you all would have had more fun, hopefully, with that than you would have if I told you to write a 5-page paper on the article and that was it. So just think about it that way. Okay, we're going to transition into universal design for learning. This is going to show up again in about, goodness, probably about 7 to 8 weeks from now. And you're actually going to make a lesson plan with universal design. So we're not going into the fine details. We just want you to know what it is. We're going over the 4 pillars of inclusive education right now. And then later you're going to find out how you can do it. So this eliminates all barriers, and it's benefiting all students, not just students with disabilities. That's why I'm so glad students who are going to teach general education only are in this class, because you all are going to benefit so much from differentiation in your future classrooms. Here's a web link. If you want to pause this and go take a look at it, it gives you all kinds of resources about universal design for learning. And it really is realizing that all students are different right from the start. We can't sit here and pretend that we're all cookie cutters. Like I said, we're not from the industrial era. We don't sit in rows and we're not robots. So it's automatically assumed we're all different. Think about your family. Think about how different you are just in that one group. Now, imagine a classroom of 30 people. It's just obvious that everyone's going to be different. So we need to treat it in that way. So remember, we have representation, expression, and engagement. These are actual examples of what you can do. You can provide text to speech, video, audio, and other media options, highlight main features, provide vocab support, give them background knowledge before you read, go over. I've seen teachers do that where they'll go through as they're reading and highlight and say, okay, what does that word mean? And they give them all these different examples. So when they're reading, now it's coming alive because before they wouldn't have known what it meant. You can use assistive technology as well, videos and all kinds of things. Multiple means of expression. You can offer graphic organizers. You can give them word banks if they're supposed to do a writing assignment where they can give them prompts for writing ideas and support. You can allow students to do voice recordings, graphic displays, performances. I'll never forget when I was in high school, we had to read all the Shakespeare books, and that could have been so boring. But my teacher had us create a project where we took the content and we had 6 choices. Mine that I chose was to design an outfit, what the king would have worn, and have to make a presentation about everything from that era. And I loved it because I love to sew and I create things and I would design outfits. So I never forgot that project and the information attached to it. So if you can get to students' hearts, and honestly, once you get to know your students enough, you'll start to be able to make large categories of things. Maybe your students love video games. You can challenge them to create a board game or a video game based on the content. Or maybe they're YouTubers and they love watching shows or making them. You could have them do a YouTube or a TikTok, or get creative and stick with the times. As long as it's appropriate things that they're doing, then you're good. Multiple means of engagement. So with this one, you can vary the levels of challenge so that you can prevent boredom or frustration. You can make sure you have different levels where you give extra activities for those who get things done so fast and then they're bored in class. And you can chunk things and slow things down for those who aren't going to get it as fast. You can tie in real world examples. So it's best, especially for all ages, but high school really needs that because you'll hear all the time as a high school teacher, when am I ever going to use this? So if you're teaching algebra or trigonometry, you could show them how surveyors are able to go out into the field and they use trigonometry and Pythagorean theorem and all those things that they think they'll never use, and show them how it works out there. And maybe they'll become interested. Always provide choice whenever possible. It not only is a behavioral strategy, it's also great for assignments because it allows them to choose something they're comfortable doing and still get the content across. And that's why rubrics are very important, so that no matter what they choose, they're still getting across what you want done. And then you have to do some self-assessments with them, reflect with them, give them feedback on their assignments and say, hey, this is what you did really well and here's what you didn't do well. Here's how you can improve next time. And then you could even have them self-reflect. What do you think how well do you think you did on this assignment? What would you do differently next time? Students love self-assessment and they can do really well, and peer can also be a positive thing if you've got a good group for that. So here's an example of a traditional class versus a universal design for learning class. So everybody gets print and they get the same materials. Here you go, pass out the papers, read this, fill in the questions, you're done, goodbye. That's a typical classroom if you go out there. Universal design for learning says that you have put some printed text, maybe some different choices for articles. You've put up a video that's really interesting about it. You've got audio materials. Maybe you've got a guest speaker that you can bring in. Just make it interesting. And then once again, this website will really help you come up with new ideas. Here are some other digital examples of materials. This is at that UDL site that's right here. This is another great example. You can check this out as well. It allows students to not only read it, but it highlights certain areas. They can ask for definitions. It could be read out loud to them. And this is a great way to meet so many students' needs. You can check this out as well, Kidspiration. And it allows them to, it's a graphic organizer basically. And it takes a story and it helps them figure out main characters, setting, and it's fun and interactive where they can drag things in, they can write a little bit, and it's just a whole new way to get the same point across. You can make PowerPoints that you could click on it and a video shows up. Maybe you could have them act out a scene from this book and pretend one's the king, one are the subjects in his kingdom, and just play out exactly what happened. I'm telling you, they won't forget that afterwards. There are also these types of books that are for older grade. Can read it to them. You can ask for definitions. It really just gives it a virtual way instead of only textbook. I use this when, remember I mentioned Shakespeare a minute ago? I for sure bought the SparkNotes every single time, because those of you who were in classes that read Shakespeare, you understand. It's so hard to know what Shakespeare's talking about half the time. So this SparkNote is a lifesaver, and it will help students gain meaning as they do read Shakespearean. And then there are all kinds of other SparkNote tools out there. In a traditional classroom, you have a lecture where it's just sit and get. There's maybe a little bit of grouping, but typically everyone's together, just note taking. There's no support, no graphic organizers, no anything. And with UDL, you should avoid limiting your presentation style to only PowerPoint. You can ask questions and do clarification and get student participation. And you can assign students to work groups in different areas, and they can learn from each other with complementary skills. You can give some materials for students to note take. I used to make an outline for students that they could just write in the notes or fill in the blank. That really helps them as well, instead of just saying, go ahead and take notes, because that doesn't always work for all of our students. So that's why I wonder how teachers are doing right now with COVID teaching online, because that's a whole new ballgame of figuring out how to do UDL online. I'm even trying to figure that out right now. So, because it's hard when you don't have someone in front of you to engage, and it's just a whole different ballgame. So hopefully one day COVID will go away and we can get back to our classrooms. Otherwise, next year I'm going to have to include online teaching with UDL, because I think we're all still figuring that out right now. Let me know if you all have any questions this week on any of your assignments or any of this content, and I look forward to talking to you all soon and reading your responses. Have a great week.